My beloved child. Do not move past this moment too quickly, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of a chapter that has been silently changing behind the scenes. Something has shifted. Something that seemed stubborn, complicated, and almost impossible to untangle has finally begun to release its grip. And the person your heart has been connected to is feeling the impact so deeply that they can barely contain the emotion rising inside them. There are tears, yes, but these are not the tears you may have imagined. They are tears of relief. Tears of recognition. Tears that come when someone realizes that the door they thought had been permanently closed may actually be opening again. Stay with this message, because the most important part is not simply that a third presence has moved out of the way. The greater revelation is why it happened now, what changed inside your soulmate, and what they have finally understood about you. For longer than you knew, there was confusion surrounding this connection. Not always obvious confusion. Some of it was hidden beneath silence, pride, distractions, excuses, and moments when your soulmate seemed to act as though everything was perfectly fine. But heaven saw what the outside world could not see. There were nights when they questioned the decisions they had made. There were mornings when your name entered their mind before they had even gathered the strength to face the day. There were moments when they tried to convince themselves that distance from you was easier than honesty with you. And yet every attempt to bury the truth seemed to make it louder. The more they tried to ignore what they felt, the more they began to notice the emptiness created by pretending that you did not matter. The third party may have occupied space, but occupying space is not the same as holding a heart. That difference is becoming painfully clear now. Your soulmate has begun to understand that proximity can never replace depth. Attention can never replace understanding. Convenience can never replace the strange, undeniable peace they associated with you. Something in them has been comparing what they once felt in your presence with what they have been experiencing elsewhere, and the contrast has become impossible to ignore. This is where the story takes a turn, because the person who once believed they could simply move forward without facing their feelings has reached a point where avoidance no longer feels like freedom. It feels like loss. And this is why those tears are falling. Your soulmate is not only reacting to someone leaving. They are reacting to the truth that remained after the noise disappeared. When the distractions became quieter, when the conversations changed, when the emotional tension finally broke apart, there was one reality waiting beneath everything: they still cared about you far more than they had admitted. That realization did not arrive gently. It arrived like a wave. It forced them to remember what they had dismissed. It forced them to revisit words they once misunderstood. It forced them to question whether the distance between you was ever truly what they wanted, or whether it was simply the result of fear, pressure, pride, timing, and confusion. Listen carefully, because there is something even deeper happening here. The third party did not disappear because you defeated anyone. This is not a story about winning against another person. This is a story about truth becoming stronger than illusion. Whatever role that person played, whatever expectations existed, whatever emotional arrangement surrounded your soulmate, something eventually became impossible to maintain. The energy of pretending cracked. The conversations stopped feeling natural. The excuses stopped working. And your soulmate found themselves standing face to face with something they had delayed for too long. If they continued living against what their heart had been trying to tell them, they would lose more than a relationship. They would lose the chance to become honest with themselves. There was a moment recently when everything inside them became still. It may have happened late at night, while they were alone with their thoughts. It may have happened after a conversation ended differently than expected. It may have happened while they looked at something that reminded them of you. But suddenly, their mind stopped running in circles. They saw you differently. They saw the past differently. And perhaps most painfully, they saw their own behavior differently. They remembered the patience you showed when they were uncertain. They remembered the times you understood what they could not explain. They remembered how your presence made them feel seen in ways that frightened them, because being truly seen meant they could no longer hide behind the version of themselves they presented to everyone else. That memory changed something. There are people who enter a life and create excitement. There are others who create distraction. And then there are rare connections that create recognition. The kind where another person somehow reflects parts of the soul that have been buried beneath years of self-protection. This is what your soulmate has been struggling to understand. They may have thought their feelings for you were inconvenient. They may have believed the connection was too intense, too complicated, too poorly timed, or too difficult to explain. But what they are beginning to see is that the difficulty was not proof that the connection lacked meaning. Sometimes the difficulty came from how much truth it demanded. Your presence required them to become emotionally honest. That frightened them. And because they were frightened, they may have chosen what felt easier over what felt deeper. They may have allowed another person, another influence, another situation to stand between them and what they truly wanted. But easier does not always mean peaceful. And now the difference has become undeniable. There is something they wish they could tell you about that period. Something they have rehearsed privately but have not yet had the courage to say aloud. They want you to know that there were moments when they almost reached out. More than once. They typed words and erased them. They imagined conversations with you and stopped themselves. They wondered whether you would answer, whether you would be cold, whether you would forgive them, whether you had finally stopped caring. Every possibility frightened them because each possibility forced them to accept how much power your absence still had over their emotions. Then something happened. You changed. Perhaps you did not announce it. Perhaps there was no dramatic declaration. Perhaps you simply became quieter. Stronger. Less available to chaos. Less willing to chase what refused to choose you clearly. Something in the way you carried yourself shifted, and even from a distance, your soulmate sensed it. They began to realize that you were no longer standing in the same emotional place where they had left you. You were becoming someone who could love deeply without abandoning yourself. Someone who could remember a connection without allowing it to consume every part of your life. Someone who could feel tenderness and still keep walking forward. And that is the part that shook them. Because suddenly, the possibility of losing you became real. Before, some part of them assumed there would always be more time. They believed that if the connection was truly strong, it would somehow wait forever. They told themselves they could sort out everything else first. They thought they could return to the truth whenever they were ready. But hearts are not waiting rooms. Life continues. People heal. People grow. And your soulmate began to understand that you were no longer frozen in the place where they had last seen you emotionally. That realization triggered something powerful inside them. At first, it looked like panic. Then regret. Then longing. Then an unexpected sense of joy. Why joy? Because the third party was no longer standing between them and the truth. The situation that once felt tangled had finally opened. The emotional pressure had shifted. Your soulmate could breathe differently. And instead of feeling the freedom they thought they wanted, they immediately thought about you. That was the revelation that brought tears to their eyes. The obstacle disappeared, and their first instinct was not to celebrate independence. Their first instinct was to wonder whether there was still a path back toward you. This is where the story becomes more emotional than they expected. They started remembering the smallest things. Not only dramatic memories. Not only romantic moments. They remembered your expressions. The way you reacted when you were trying not to show that something mattered. The way your energy changed when you became quiet. The way you listened. The way you challenged them without trying to control them. The way certain conversations with you stayed in their head long after they ended. They remembered details they had never admitted remembering. And as those memories returned, your soulmate began to understand something that had been hidden beneath all the confusion. They had never truly detached from you. They had adapted to your absence. There is a difference. Detachment brings neutrality. Adaptation simply teaches a person how to survive something they still feel. Your soulmate survived the distance. They continued living. They spoke to people. They smiled. They handled responsibilities. They tried to convince themselves they had accepted everything. But beneath the routine, a part of them remained unfinished. There was a sentence they never completed. A truth they never expressed. An apology they never fully formed. A feeling they never gave a proper name. And now that unfinished part is becoming impossible to ignore. The third party leaving created silence. And in that silence, your name returned. Not because heaven forced anyone. Not because destiny removes free will. But because when distraction fades, people often hear what their own hearts have been whispering all along. Your soulmate is hearing that whisper now, and it is louder than they expected. They are asking themselves questions they avoided before. What if I misunderstood them? What if they were never asking for perfection, only honesty? What if I pushed away the one person who genuinely saw me? What if they are already moving on? What if I waited too long? That last question carries the greatest weight. Because your soulmate now realizes that your love, if it ever returns, cannot be treated casually. The version of you they once knew has been transformed by everything you have endured. You have learned something about your worth. You have discovered that loving someone does not require chasing them through confusion. You have begun to understand that real connection should eventually produce clarity, not endless uncertainty. Your soulmate senses this. And this is why their happiness is mixed with vulnerability. They are happy because the situation around them has changed. They are happy because the path no longer appears completely blocked. They are happy because the truth they feared admitting is finally becoming something they may be able to act upon. But they are also afraid. Afraid that you have become too strong to accept half-hearted effort. Afraid that their delay created damage they cannot easily repair. Afraid that when they finally speak, you may listen with a heart that no longer belongs to the past. And yet there is something within them saying, try. That inner voice is growing stronger. There was a time when pride could silence it. Not anymore. There was a time when outside influence could confuse it. Not anymore. There was a time when another person's presence could help them avoid confronting it. Not anymore. Now it is just them and the truth. And the truth has your name written through it. My child, do not misunderstand what I am showing you. This is not an instruction to run toward anyone who has kept you uncertain. It is not an invitation to abandon your boundaries simply because someone has become emotional. Growth means allowing actions to reveal what words cannot. If someone returns, let them return with clarity. Let them return with responsibility. Let them return with the courage to speak plainly about what happened, what changed, and what they are prepared to do differently. You are not being prepared to repeat the old chapter. You are being prepared to recognize whether a new one is truly possible. That is why your own transformation matters so much in this story. You may believe the biggest event was the third party leaving, but heaven sees something greater. You stop negotiating with your own worth. Even if you still care, even if there are nights when memories return, even if part of you still wonders how everything will unfold, there has been a quiet strengthening inside you. You are learning not to confuse longing with destiny. You are learning not to interpret silence as a promise. You are learning that love should not require you to constantly decode someone else's intentions. And strangely, it was precisely this change in you that your soulmate began to feel. The moment you stopped energetically waiting in the same way, they noticed the distance differently. The moment you turned some of your attention back toward your own life, something in them became restless. The moment you began choosing peace over emotional chasing, they began realizing what your presence had once given them. This is the unfinished part of the title you were drawn toward. Your soulmate is crying with happiness because you finally. No. Not yet. There is something you must understand before those words are completed, because without this next revelation, the meaning would be too easy to misunderstand. What you finally did was not what they expected. They thought you would keep reaching. They thought you would keep proving. They thought you would remain emotionally available no matter how long they hesitated. But something changed in you that forced them to confront themselves. And when they realized exactly what you had done, the emotional wall they had spent so long building began to collapse. They could no longer blame timing. They could no longer blame circumstances. They could no longer blame another person. Because suddenly, the only question left was whether they were brave enough to become the person this connection demanded. There was another conversation connected to all of this. A conversation you have not heard about. Someone close to your soulmate noticed the change in them. They noticed the unusual quietness. They noticed the way your soulmate seemed distracted even during ordinary moments. Eventually, they asked a simple question. Who are you really thinking about? Your soulmate tried to avoid answering. Then their eyes changed. The person sitting across from them already knew. They said your name. And your soulmate did something completely unexpected. They did not deny it. That silence said more than any explanation could have said. But then came the part that surprised even the person speaking with them. Your soulmate admitted that the third-party situation was over. Not paused. Not uncertain. Over. The emotional connection had reached its end because something fundamental could no longer be ignored. Your soulmate realized they were trying to build something in one place while their deepest unresolved feelings remained somewhere else. With you. The person listening asked them whether they intended to contact you. Your soulmate's response was immediate. I don't know if they still want me. Those words carried more emotion than they expected. Because for the first time, they were no longer thinking only about whether they wanted you. They were thinking about whether they had done enough to deserve another chance to enter your life. That is growth. Not complete growth. Not proof of transformation. But the beginning of accountability. They are starting to understand that love is not simply about feeling strongly. It is about how you treat the person who awakens those feelings. And this realization is changing the way they imagine approaching you. Before, they might have returned casually, testing the waters, offering vague words, hoping you would make everything easy. Now they know vague words may not be enough. They know you may ask questions. They know you may need consistency. They know you may refuse to be pulled back into uncertainty. And strangely, this does not make them want to disappear. It makes them want to become more honest. There is a message forming inside them. Not yet sent. Not yet spoken. But forming. They have considered many versions. A simple greeting. A confession. An apology. A question. But each version feels too small compared with what they really want to say. Because what they truly want to tell you is that losing the illusion of you made them understand the reality of you. They thought they could recreate the feeling elsewhere. They could not. They thought distance would weaken the connection. Instead, distance revealed which parts of it were genuine. They thought another person might help them forget. Instead, comparison made certain memories stronger. And now they are standing at the edge of a decision that may change everything. But there is one more detail you need to hear. The third party did not simply disappear without a final exchange. There was a conversation. Words were spoken that your soulmate cannot forget. The third party noticed something before your soulmate was ready to admit it. They noticed that whenever the subject of genuine love came up, your soulmate became emotionally distant. They noticed that there was always some invisible reference point against which every connection was being measured. Eventually, they asked the question directly. Is there someone else in your heart? Your soulmate hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. And what happened after that is part of why the ending came so suddenly. There was no dramatic battle. No grand scene. Just a painful recognition between two people that one person's heart was still tied to an unfinished story. Your story. And when that chapter closed, your soulmate was left alone with the realization they had been postponing. They sat in silence. Then they cried. Not because the third party was gone, but because the absence of that person removed the final excuse. Now there was nothing standing between your soulmate and the truth. Nothing except courage. They thought of you. They thought of everything that happened. They thought of what they wished they had done differently. Then, through those tears, they smiled. Because they remembered something you once said. Something they had dismissed at the time. Something about choosing what is real over what is easy. Those words returned with astonishing clarity. And this is where the story turns again. Because your soulmate believes you may have recently made a decision of your own. A decision they somehow discovered. A decision involving whether you would keep waiting, keep holding space, keep leaving the emotional door open. When they learned what you had finally chosen, they did not react the way anyone expected. Their hands began trembling. Their eyes filled with tears. And the person beside them asked, "Why are you smiling?" Your soulmate whispered an answer so quietly that it almost went unheard. Because what you finally did proved something they had been terrified to hope for. But before I tell you exactly what that decision was, there is one final piece of this revelation you need to understand. Your soulmate has already begun preparing for a conversation with you. And they are not planning to return with the story you think they are going to tell. There is another confession hidden behind the disappearance of the third party. A confession about you. A confession about what your soulmate realized during the final days of that situation. A confession that explains why they are suddenly willing to risk rejection rather than remain silent. And when you hear what they finally admitted to themselves after the third party walked away, you will understand why those tears of happiness were only the beginning.